Hello everyone and welcome. Usually I don't do this, but just because I think we have a lot of people who are relatively new to the group, I just wanted to give a brief introduction to myself and Sarah and the initiative. I'm Monica Walker. I'm a curler with USA Curling, and Sarah Carlson represents Curling Sweden. We kind of came together to form this global initiative for DEI in curling because we felt there was a need for it. There was nothing really happening on this front globally. And so we've kind of brought together the leadership in this space all across the world, leaders in curling who want to work on this stuff. And our plan mostly is to provide, educational resources like these webinars. We also provide a newsletter. And we're working on a bunch of cool stuff that's coming up. We're working on a website, and that will hopefully host a bunch of resources that everyone can share, and also some tools that you can use within your own organization. So lots to come. Please reach out to us with our email and also sign up for our newsletter as well. And we just recently went on social media, so you can check us out there too. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you covered all of it.
Awesome. The last thing I wanted to say is we have panelists here that are going to be speaking today. But if anyone who's watching wants to ask a question, please feel free to go down to the Q&A tab at the bottom and just type your question in. We may or may not get to it. I'm not sure how long this is going to take, and we want to make sure the panelists have time to say everything they want to say. But if you are wanting to ask a question, please do it that way. And yeah, I guess we'll just jump into this. So we're really excited to have this group of panelists. Everyone in this group kind of has a unique situation in curling, either coming from a different country and curling in their new country, or bringing curling back to their original country. The circumstances are different for every person in this panel, and we kind of figured that out when we were trying to come up with a name for the panel. We ended up with, what was it, Sarah? It was Emerging Countries in Curling, Expat Curlers, and Curling in a Diaspora. But that that doesn't even really cover all the different situations that are represented in this panel. So the title is Fluid and Open for Discussion. And we're really glad to have everyone here today. So I guess we'll just kind of jump in with introductions. So I'm just going to kind of go through the group and ask everyone to, say your name, what country you're from originally, what country you live in now, just a little bit of your background and where you're at. So if Kim wouldn't mind starting, we'll start with you.
There we go. Good morning. It's bright and early. The sun isn't even up in Australia yet, but I'm really happy to be on this call and included in this group. I am Kim Forge, and currently I'm the president of the Australian Curling Federation. I grew up in Canada. You might be able to tell that from my accent. And I've actually just this week had my 20th anniversary of moving to Australia. So I did my first better half of my life in Canada watching curling. I grew up in a small town in Alberta where the curling rink was the hub of the activity. I was your typical high school athlete that played basketball, volleyball, and anything I could get my hands on, but also was drawn to this curling. My parents and grandparents curled in the curling club, and we learned how to curl in phys ed. So we walked during our phys ed classes to the curling rink, had the classes, and I think that's really my love of that, and watching it on TV in Canada. I wanted to have the perfect slide. I was just intrigued by how that looked, how that felt, how it felt to throw a good rock, that kind of thing. I started curling then later in high school, and it curled as much as I could in more than one league. At that time, mixed doubles wasn't a thing, so it was more of the ladies and the mixed, and more of a social thing. It became quite competitive and started in zone playdowns and so on, and loving winning, actually. But I moved to Australia for a teaching exchange in 2001. And many of my friends said, well, Kim, what are you going to do over there? There's no curling. And I said, oh, it's no big deal. I'm going to start my own curling team. I'm going to represent the country. And I said that in jest. I had no idea. I didn't even know that there was curling in Australia. But a few years down the track, my mom phoned me. She was watching the World Curling Championships that were in Victoria at the time, and said she saw the Australian men playing, and said, Kim, there is curling in Australia. You better have a look. So honestly, I went on the website, and within minutes, my heart was pounding. I was so excited. I contacted the Curling Federation at that time and said, I used to be pretty good. I'm not being too conceited or anything, but I said, I can play, and I want a chance. And so I went the very next week to Bendigo, which is a 3-hour drive for me, on ice hockey ice. It smelt similar to what I was used to with the ice and the change rooms and things like that. So I was pretty excited. But the ice was terrible. It was moguls, and I thought, I can't really justify driving 2.5, 3 hours on a weeknight to come and do this. But I love it. And then I realized that probably my in would be on the elite curling side of things, not necessarily the social side of things. And at that point, it was a selection type thing. You went, and there wasn't very many women curlers in Australia. And so I was able to join a team with some of the veterans on our team. And my first Pacific Curling Championship was in Taipei. I can't remember what year, maybe 2004 or 5, something like that. It's unfortunate. We do have curling in Australia, but it is on ice hockey ice, and all in different parts of the country. And our country is huge. So we have it in Brisbane, in a bit in New South Wales, in Melbourne, and in Perth, Western Australia. So unfortunately, I don't live close to really any of those, but we do train in New Zealand, and that's where we host our nationals. We felt that it's important that we have dedicated curling ice to curl on when we are competing for a national championship. We thought that, ice hockey ice is an equalizer. It's unfortunate, but anybody can beat anybody on that kind of ice. And with our men, they were quite competitive at the time and had a real run at the Olympics in Vancouver. Unfortunately, Australia placed 11th in it, and they needed to be top 10 for that 2010 a year. So how it's evolved for me is that I have represented Australia 20 times internationally now, in women's, in mixed fours, and in mixed doubles. Mixed doubles was really my breakthrough. With smaller countries like mine and less competitive athletes, it was easier to find, to pair up with one other person who was as committed and had some success at international level. And in our first year at a Worlds, Hugh Milliken and I, we placed 5th, which was, it was at that time the highest finish for an Australian team. That got us noticed within our country. Curling isn't a popular sport in Australia, to be honest. Not really any winter sports are. So we kind of fight against that, because Australians are known for tennis, swimming, athletics, the summer sports. And so it's been not a struggle, but a challenge, I guess, to become a recognized sport within Australia. After our success internationally, our Australian Curling Federation grew more, and I became a bit more vocal and more passionate about making things easier for elite athletes in Australia that wanted to curl. So I was kind of persuaded to run for the Australian Curling Federation president, and so I've done that, and I have been that for the last 8 years. And within that time, we've really lobbied our government, our Australian Olympic Committee, and really made some good inroads using our international contacts and the passion within the players that are in this country. We've grown now to our men's discipline. We have 9 teams that fly to New Zealand to compete for our nationals. You know, so we've gone from a handful of players that were just, you know, the same ones every year to now we have probably between 40 and 60 players between the men's and women's discipline that fly to New Zealand to train prior to our nationals and then compete for our nationals. So I think that's success for us. You know, we do have curling, social curling within each of the states, but it's not really the same. It grows the numbers, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't really breed more participation globally, that's for sure. So right now, what we're at is, you know, COVID has thrown us a bit of a loop. We can't get to New Zealand, even in New Zealand, like both of our countries are quite great with the numbers, but we're having to be creative, and our goal is to make the Olympics. And this year, it's really, really important that our mixed doubles team get on the ice. We have, at the last World Championships, our mixed doubles team placed 4th. And honestly, if we can get to the Olympics, I think that will grow our sport nationally. Back to, you know, my first go in Australia was because of curling being on TV in Canada. I think that the media is just such a huge factor for us, and having it in mainstream television is absolutely pivotal for any country or developing country being able to grow. I think if our mixed doubles team happens to get to the Olympics, then we'll get far more recognition. People will be more intrigued, and we might get a facility ourselves. So that's the chicken and the egg thing. And for us, it happens to be results first. We need the results, and then we'll get, you know, some facilities and be able to be more self-sustainable within our country.
Awesome. Thank you.
So that's me.
Yeah, we definitely are going to talk a lot more about a lot of the things that you brought up for sure. Moving forward, can we have Raju speak next? And Kim, I appreciate everything you said, but Raju and other panelists don't feel that you have to go into as much detail, because I know different organizations are at different levels of development too, so there may not be as much to share. So keep that in mind too. Thanks.
Hey everyone, my name is PN Raju. I'm originally from India. I mean, I was born and grew up in India, spent most of my adult life in India, moved to the US about 7 years ago for work, moved to the Bay Area. I didn't really expect there to be curling ice in San Francisco. Actually, I first discovered curling in way back in 2006. That was the first time the Winter Olympics were broadcast live on national TV in India. And curling was one of the sport that I watched a lot during those Olympics, and the time difference between Torino and India was perfect. So got to watch a lot of curling. I had always wanted to play the sport, but I had to wait 8 years because I was living in places with no access to ice or any Winter Olympic sports. And when I moved to the Bay Area about 7 years ago, that's when I found the Bay Area Curling Club and started curling about 7 years ago. And I'm involved with the Curling Federation of India as the technical director. Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Could we have Adriana go next, please?
Well, good morning and good evening, or wherever people are listening. And I want to thank Monica and Sarah for this opportunity to talk about curling from other parts of the world. I am speaking as an individual player. I have played for Mexico. I've had that honor, and I also support in the Mexican Curling Federation and their multiple endeavors to grow curling in country. I myself live in San Francisco, California. I am Mexican national, and as of very recently, last year, also a US citizen. But I am incredibly proud to have represented my country and to continue to strive to improve our our efforts. The Mexican Curling Federation actually was founded, I believe, in 2017 and has had a fast and furious kind of pace of increasing its presence. Part of that was the identification of existing players like myself, and also other players. My mixed doubles teammate at the time, Rami Cohen, is in Seattle, and since then, that was 2019, 2020, and by we went to the America's Challenge. By then, we had identified 4 Mexican men's and 4 women's players, and there are actually more, but they're more interested in around club curling. So and the Mexican, so there are 2 tracks that the Mexican Curling Federation is following. It's you could say it's improved high performance from existing players, and I think Kim's experience is similar in that regard with a lot more prior experience in Australia, and also establishing curling in Mexico, which has a whole other dynamic in terms that is more similar to trying to create, say, an arena club or a dedicated ice facility. That's just so difficult, right? And to create community in country. So I would say that that's 2 parallel experiences that are part of our experience of growing the sport. And they come together, and they kind of weave in and out in terms of how they can have similar moments of interaction. The other thing I want to say is that curling in the US and being part of a US club, I'm also very interested in the diversity and inclusion projects that are now taking off around the country and around the world. So that's my introduction.
Awesome. Thank you. I'd like to hear more about that later. Could we have Jason go next and introduce himself?
Thanks very much, Monica. My name is Jason Chang. I represent the Hong Kong Curling Association. I am born in Hong Kong, but I've lived much of my life in Canada. Currently, I'm in Toronto, Canada. Much like Kim, I got into curling from watching curling as a young kid. After I moved to Canada as a young kid, I watched a lot of sports on TV, and of course we saw a lot of winter sports when we were in Canada watching TV. So I was really hooked on curling from a very young age. I didn't get into curling till into my teens, and then started to really take it up, play competitively. In fact, I played with Ray, who's on one of our panelists for a couple of years, trying to make a provincial championship or play for a national championship in Canada. But in terms of my own work in curling within Canada, I crew at the East York Curling Club. I've been there for 20 years. I'm actually the current past president, so I was president for a couple of years, a few years ago, and I was recently on the board of directors of the Toronto Curling Association. I just stepped off the board this past season, but diversity and inclusion is a big issue within Toronto's curling community as well. The Hong Kong Curling Association started up, I believe, in 2014 or 15. 2015 was the first year that a Hong Kong team, the men's, played at the Pacific Asia Curling Championships. I joined the Hong Kong team in 2016, and then subsequently met Kim and some of the other panelists at international competitions. I am on the executive committee of the association, and there are many challenges. I think we face some of the same challenges that Kim does in terms of facilities, and many of the other panelists here. Hong Kong being in a subtropical environment, winter sports is not a big thing in Hong Kong. Certainly there is some hockey and some skating, but that's usually what the ice is for people to just skate. Curling isn't really a thing. Most recently, in the past couple of years, we started to get some arena ice time, kind of once a week at Glacier Festival Walk. The curlers, so our competitive curlers there, curl for a couple of hours, I think at night on a Monday. And they also do some come try curling sessions for people to just drop in and try the sport. But really, we don't have any curling leagues or competitions that we're running in Hong Kong right now because of the limitations. In terms of our association, we do have people on the ground in Hong Kong. The association, the other executives, and the board of directors is primarily in Hong Kong. So they are looking at ways to develop the sport, getting more promotion. Echo what Kim said, having TV and media exposure is really key and really important. We certainly don't have television coverage of curling in Hong Kong, but our association has been constantly reaching out to local media, whether it's radio, magazines, newspapers, and television shows to try to get on those programs to promote the sport of curling. So that's kind of the strategy we've taken, because we aren't able to get a full broadcast of one of our games in Hong Kong yet. But hopefully that happens in the not too distant future. In terms of other challenges, I see it's not just the diversity in terms of the cultures and backgrounds of people in that sense, but I also think it's really important that we're making sure we're engaging those the demographics, such as, for instance, those with disabilities into the sport. I think curling has a great potential to bring in the disability community. We already have, of course, wheelchair curling, but it's actually a sport where able-bodied individuals, as well as those with disabilities, can actually play the game at the same time if we wanted to, right? So I think there's a real opportunity to talk about diversity and inclusion from that angle as well. And I'll just end by saying, I mentioned that because we do have a men's, women's, we have senior men's, senior women's, junior men, but we don't yet have a wheelchair curling team in Hong Kong. And I know that's something that our association wants to develop is having a wheelchair curling team.
Yeah, that would be very exciting. Thank you, Jason. And if we could have Ray share next.
So hi, everyone. My name is Ray Hussein, representing Guyana, but born and raised in Brampton, Ontario. So Brampton is just outside of Toronto, for those that don't know. So my story is kind of different from everyone else's because I'm born and raised here in Canada, but my parents are both from Guyana. So I received my citizenship by descent. So I am currently the General Secretary of the Guyana Curling Federation and an athlete. So I basically operate the federation from here in Toronto, basically. Majority of our executive on the Curling Federation board are in Guyana, but they're with the Olympic Association and don't have much knowledge of curling. So the majority of the workings of our federation is kind of a one-man show from here. So yeah, so my story in curling is kind of similar to Jason. And Jason and I were teammates, so he already told everyone that. But yeah, it started watching TV probably when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and we didn't have many channels at the time, probably about 7 or 8 channels, and the CBC was one of them. And I think they were showing the Scott Tournament of Hearts at that time. And I was like, oh, this looks interesting. It seems kind of new and exciting. It's not tennis, it's not baseball, it's not, all those kind of traditional sports. So I thought it was pretty fascinating and kind of got hooked right away. So I would beg my parents pretty much all the time. I was like, I really want to try that, not knowing that we had a curling club literally across the street from us the whole time. So not until probably about like 12 or 13 years old, I was able to go to the curling club. I finally got them to take me to the curling club, and I tried on their youth night just to throw a couple rocks with a friend that actually lived in the same apartment complex as me. And yeah, it was a natural. My parents' biggest fear was that I was going to slide on this ice and I was going to fall flat on my face. We aren't the most athletically gifted people, and so to try a sport on ice was especially kind of worrying for them. So, but I slid on the ice and threw a rock, and it was a natural, and I loved it. So, so I didn't actually take up the sport for another couple years thereafter in high school curling. And oddly enough, the first year that I played high school curling, we won a regional championship. So I've always been super competitive, always loved the game. And so my involvement continued with the club. I've been anything from webmaster, PR director, men's coordinator, mixed coordinator, anything under the sun. I've been the president for about 3 years. And yeah, so anything and everything in curling at the club level, I've been involved in. I've also been on the Toronto Curling Association board of directors with Jason for, I think, only a year. But yeah, and actually the year after that, was when we started Guyana Curling Federation, which was around 2016. So Chad McMullen, who I was actually in touch with 6 years prior, oddly doing a diversity report for the CBC, reached out and said, oh, I'm helping with Curling Mexico at the time. And I said, oh, well, maybe there's a chance that I could start a curling federation for Guyana, because I look at curling on TV in Canada and see no representation from the greater population. So when I first started in school in Canada, basically I was the only person of color. By the time I left school in Canada, it was odd to see someone that wasn't my color in the school. So I look at our population, how it's changed over the years, and I looked at curling and said, oh, it hasn't changed in terms of the faces that we see on TV. And I thought this was a great opportunity to at least start it from my parents' country and hopefully spur interest elsewhere. So from 2016, we reached out to our Olympic Association and they were totally on board. They only had one winter sport federation, which was inactive. It was a ski federation. So we were the first active winter sports federation in Guyana. And so we got approved by the WCF in 2016 and we successfully launched the sport in 2017 in Guyana. We went to a pretty busy shopping mall in Georgetown and launched the sport there with a street curling rink. And we had a lot of popularity for taking up the floor curling or the street curling there. We had 2 days of it and pretty much everyone wanted to try it. We had a group of about 50 school kids that were just so excited with it. But the biggest challenge we face is I don't have anyone on the ground there in Guyana to kind of champion our causes and kind of grow the game more. I'd love to do floor curling leagues once this pandemic is over. I hope to travel back down there to start doing instruction in schools and hopefully have floor curling leagues established, not only within schools, but community groups. And also we've had interest from those in wheelchairs. So we've had some athletes that have been in other sports in wheelchairs and want to know if they can get involved with curling. So also finding people there to champion wheelchair curling and whatnot. So that's kind of our plan moving forward. We also don't have very many curlers in general. We have 6 in total. So it's myself, my sister, and 4 others that currently curl, and we're mostly in the Toronto area, or we have 1 in the Minnesota area in the States. So I've always insisted that the way we get more development in the country is by having success at a competitive level, because without that recognition for those that are actually good at the sport, no one's going to want to take it up back home. So for me, it's kind of a reverse approach, kind of getting the acknowledgement and success at a competitive level to spur the interest and the growth back home. Oddly, when we played our first World Mixed Doubles in Östersund in 2018, we made the front page of the national newspaper when we beat Brazil. So that's pretty rare because it's usually always taken up by cricket or soccer. So for us to be on the front page as a winter sport was huge. So I still look at the picture almost every day because I think it's so cool. So, yeah, so I have lots of plans, need help, but we're on the way, hopefully after the pandemic is over.
Yeah, I'm sure that doesn't help very much. Thanks, Ray. And finally, we have TJ Cole, 2%.
Hi, everybody. I'm TJ Cole, and I represent Nigeria. I got involved with curling, kind of like we all have similar stories. After the Olympics in, I believe, 2014, we watched curling, and there was a group of Nigerians over at the house, and we were making some dishes, and we were talking, and we were like, that's cool, man. We need to do that. That sounds like a great sport. Something we could do the rest of our lives. And you know, we were old jocks at that time, and we were like, man, that looks like a lot of fun. And so we were talking to some folks in our home village of Onitsha, our city of Onitsha, and they said, yeah. And so then we set about forming our curling team. We approached the Nigerian Olympic Committee, and it's just fascinating. But at the same time we approached the Nigerian Olympic Committee, some folks in Germany, some Nigerians in Germany, had already approached the Nigerian Olympic Committee and were well on their way to forming the federation, the Nigerian Curling Federation. So the Nigerian Olympic Committee said, you guys need to talk to these guys because you guys are going in the same direction and you guys just need to get together. So we did, we got together. And that was 2018, beginning of 2018. We met, we got everything filed. We started training really hard. And so we had the two primary persons, my wife and I, we love mixed doubles. We'd started at the club level here in Colorado at mixed doubles just because it was easy and there was two of us. And well, there was three of us, but that we didn't have a fourth that was Nigerian. So Harold was playing on other club teams and we were playing on our team as mixed doubles. And then as part of our federation development, the Nigerian Olympic Committee said, in order to be recognized as a federation, you have to have exposed the sport throughout all 30 states in Nigeria. So we immediately got busy doing floor curling and took it on the road. We floor curled just about everywhere in Nigeria. Like many of your stories, it caught on. In Lagos, we had curling clinics of over 100 people. We've had 9 wheelchair athletes at all of those. And when we decided to do the curling tournaments, none of us had even thought that wheelchair athletes would be interested or would even come. There wasn't particular outreach to anybody. It was just general outreach to anybody. And sure enough, 8 to 9 wheelchair athletes have come to all of our clinics. And so we actively have a wheelchair clinic, a floor curling Wednesday night league. We have a floor curling regular league. And from those clinics, we were able to pick, roughly about 14 or 15 people to fill in our team slots, as well as to fill out a junior program. And so we have folks on the ground, we have folks doing things. We've had lots of TV exposure to our floor curling. We've had lots of exposure on their version of ESPN. And Susie and I have participated in the World Curling Championships in mixed doubles. We've gone to World Curling Championships, the pre-qualifiers and the qualifiers 3 times. We participated in the World Winter Masters Games. And our men's team has performed at the PAC Championships, and our mixed team has performed at the World Mixed Championships. So we've had a lot of exposure on Nigerian TV. And exposure on Canadian TV as well, almost nothing in America. But the thing that the roadblocks we seem to be running into are similar to you guys. There is no ice in Nigeria, and there is no sponsorship in Nigeria in terms of it's a wait and see thing. We get lots of smiles, lots of pats on the back, lots of go get them. We're so proud that you guys are participating. We've seen clips of you guys participate. We've seen clips of you guys winning. But we don't see you. You're not, when we watch the world, the North America versus the world, we don't see you. And so therefore you must not exist. When we look at the Olympics, we don't see you. You must not exist. And when your primary backer is the Nigerian Olympic Committee, and they want to see you do Olympic kind of stuff. So that's been our biggest issue. The thing we're trying to do now, our big effort, now that we have athletes, we have 2 problems. One, getting visas to go to ice nations to train our juniors and to train our athletes. The problem for Nigeria is that, unfortunately, Nigeria, because of a lot of internet scams and a lot of internet problems, Nigerians don't get visas. So we tried to get visas to go to Italy. Those got denied. When Susie and I participated in Norway at the World Championships, the Nigerian Olympic Committee, our federation president, and some other members on the ground who wanted to attend, including Nigeria Press, were denied visas. And so if they can't leave Nigeria, we can't train them on ice. And if we can't train them on ice, we don't have a team, except for those that live in other countries. So that's been our problem there. We are currently working on building an arena. We have obtained the land. We are working on the designs and the business plan. And again, the companies we've approached to try to raise $1 million have all said, if we saw you at the Olympics, we'd do that, but we don't see you at the Olympics. And again, this exact quote, we were watching North America versus the world. You're not part of the world. Mexico's not part of the world. Brazil's not part of the world. Hong Kong must not be part of the world, because the only people we saw were Europeans. And then another person, we talked to a bank in Nigeria, and we said, yeah, we need your support. And they said, we had one of our people go and look, and we saw the Japanese were involved at one point, and in some kind of world activity, but we didn't see nobody else. So it's just that stigma, and maybe this committee can help convince, like maybe Sweden, Canada, Scotland, the biggies, the big guys, to maybe do a worldwide fun tournament, kind of like the North America versus the world, but have a North America versus the world and really mean it's the world. Or have a continent challenge where Brazil, North America, Asia, Africa all have some kind of representation. Cool news, not a lot of people know this, but Team Kenya is coming online. And so there will be 2 teams in Africa. And that's all I got to say.
Yes, I think they emailed us, right, Sarah? Can't remember. I think we've heard from them. So that's very exciting. So thank you everyone for kind of sharing your story. I know many of you may have already shared your story multiple times with various groups, and I know it's not always the easiest thing to do. So I really do appreciate you doing that for us here today. I'd like to kind of dive down more into some of the topics that you raised throughout your introductions. And I'd like to start with the kind of the barriers to entry or any kind of obstacles that you faced. And many of you have already kind of gotten into this, but I'd like to kind of establish if there's any more barriers to entry or obstacles, either, and it can be at a personal level as an individual, but also at the organizational level. And once we kind of establish those, maybe we can go into some of the solutions or ways that you see us kind of improving as a sport. So if anyone wants to jump in, feel free. Okay, go ahead, Kim.
Sure, I'll just say a couple things. In countries where curling isn't in the news, it's not very recognized, it's a self-funded sport. So it requires a bit of sponsorship or self-supporting to be able to do that. So number one, that's a huge barrier. And until you get results, you don't get the money that you need from the federations. Also, I said earlier that women curling. So to be able to be self-supportive, usually you have to have a job, and you'll notice that in my mind, sometimes the men have more of a turnout and are able to be at nationals more and compete internationally more because they don't have the responsibilities necessarily as much at home. So the mixed doubles was a good thing because it's really tough to get 4 women that are great curlers and competitive that can leave their jobs and families. So that's a huge barrier for women. That's I just wanted to get it out. It's not just finances, it's not just facilities, and it's sometimes a gender problem as well.
Kim, just to add on to the finance question, I think many of the folks on this call and in other developing and emerging curling nations is, as Kim said, you're right, it is largely a self-funded endeavor for the athletes and for the association, right? It's the executives on the committee who are putting in their own time, energy, and money to help develop the association. And it's not just necessarily a lack of support from government sources. without results, it's hard to get sponsors as well to help pay for those travel costs and training costs. And for us in Hong Kong, even the uniforms, right? We have to pay for our uniforms ourselves too. So that's a big challenge. The other thing I want to add on to that is it's hard for a volunteer organization to quickly develop an association when no one is working for it full time, right? And if you don't have funding to pay for an executive director, how do you go from year zero, to that next level really quickly? It's very, very difficult, right? And I know, Kim, I think there's an example. You guys have done amazing, and you guys are pretty established in the world curling community, but you still see yourselves as a developing curling nation, right? You're still looking for that first dedicated facility. So, it can be a long journey if you can't pay for staff to run your association and develop your association and do that development, find sponsors, et cetera, right?
It's taken us 8-10 years to get here, and we're all volunteers. Yeah. And it's tough being, well, not tough, it's just a bit of a challenge of being an Olympic winter federation in a summer country. That's how come we're still trying to get there.
I noticed Raju had his hand up.
Yeah, if I can jump in. So I think one thing I wanted to mention was I've come across a lot of passionate curlers from countries like Singapore, Philippines, right? So, and I think for a lot of people, even India, we became a WCF member in 2019, but a bunch of us have been trying to who are passionate about trying to represent India at an international event or trying to grow the sport within India. We didn't really have the opportunity because there was no association that was recognized by WCF or the Indian Olympic Committee. So that also creates a lot of problems in terms of trying to get access to resources. So I guess what I wanted to say is I think we as a group maybe need to try and find a way where passionate curlers who might be playing in countries like the US or Canada, but who might not have the support of a local Olympic committee or Olympic committee back home, or where there is no federation yet. How do we get those curlers or that diaspora involved in growing the sport around the world?
That's really interesting, Raju. Do you think that that's something the WCF could potentially, provide resources around or support for? Maybe it's even something that, this group, the initiative, could take on temporarily, at least, as kind of an action item.
Yeah, I mean, maybe what TJ was mentioning, if we can showcase that there are people. I know, for example, the Pacific International Cup in Vancouver, they had the Singapore women's team there a few years ago. So events like that, where we have curlers from different parts of the world, either competing and trying to showcase that. And also WCF could help. For example, I attended the WCF adult camp in 2018. I signed up with an Indian address, my home address back in India. And I was told, I was put on the wait list saying India is not a member. So you'll have to wait till all the other member associations have had an opportunity to attend the camp. And then I had to reply and say, I'm also, by the way, I'm I curl in the US, I'm a member of USA Curling. Then I got off the wait list, right? So people who might be passionate, who would want to attend those camps should also maybe have an opportunity to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant barrier that you experienced. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share about this?
So I'm just going to add in.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So my barrier to getting into the sport years ago was convincing my parents. At the time, they wanted me to get into tennis, which was more prestigious, hopefully to play Wimbledon or something like that. And at 5'3", I don't think I was going to have a prayer of winning Wimbledon. So yeah, so it's just basically a cultural kind of thing where, at least for us, there was always kind of a stigma around certain winter sports like curling and whatnot, that it's not prestigious, it's not popular. They want to see you, you know, take up a sport where there is kind of like a long-term future of money or fame or something. Even if you don't achieve it, it's just in their heads more prestigious. And that was a long time ago, like we're talking like the mid-90s. So, and although I love tennis and I still do play tennis, curling was always my passion. So it's just basically kind of that cultural shift of kind of getting the mindset of, you know, like in our Caribbean community, I'm always trying to get them out to come and try curling. It's a mindset thing where either the sport is not prestigious enough or they just don't want to play a winter sport. Like a lot of the immigrants to Canada from Guyana, Trinidad, you know, the greater Caribbean and South America, they're like, no, I'm freezing during the winter. The last thing I want to do is go play a winter sport and be even more cold. So it's kind of a cultural shift to kind of find a way to convince them to take up the sport. That's how in our community, it's kind of going to be a long-term process. And I'll also tell another story. In 1997, this guy named Rudy Ramcharan played with Kevin Martin. And so Rudy is from Trinidad. And so he won the Brier, went to the World Championships that year, and was like basically one game away from making it to the Nagano Olympics. But his success and being on TV basically radiated through the whole Caribbean community. So our local Caribbean newspapers featured him. And again, that's a rarity because it takes cricket, track, soccer, all take up the sports news. So for Rudy to be in there regularly was a big thing. And everyone was talking about curling for basically about a year and a half, 2 years. As soon as he disappeared, that was the end of all the enthusiasm. So from our standpoint, also having someone's really visible, as TJ was saying, it's like, you know, North America versus the world, where's the real world, right? Obviously you have to earn your spot there. I don't think it should be given, but visibility, you know, in terms of a larger scale would definitely help in terms of getting more popularity in our communities.
Ray, I just wanted to, you know, touch on what you're talking about in terms of Rudy Ramcharan and the Caribbean community. Certainly he got, and I remember him playing at the Brier and watching him, and he was incredibly popular because he was the person who looked different from everybody else at the men's national championships that year. And he got quite a following and got quite a fan base there. But so there was a lot of uptake, right, in terms of the local media or the Caribbean media about Rudy. But why didn't that translate through into more participation from that, you know, that demographic? Was there, because there wasn't a federation like you now have, the Guyana Federation, that could follow up on that media success?
Yeah, that's exactly the thing, is we had no one at the time to follow up on it. So there was no such thing as, you know, a Caribbean tri-curling clinic. It was non-existent at that time. I think at that time I would have been like 12 years old. So for me as a 12-year-old to say, well, let's get you guys into the curling club now is just not going to happen, right? So it's unfortunate that we weren't able to take advantage of that success during the mid-90s, late 90s and stuff like that. But that's
Ray, do you know where he is now?
I believe he's still in Alberta.
We should get him back in the picture.
I have him on Facebook, but I haven't been able to message him. But yeah, he would be a valuable resource in terms of his experience and kind of like a throwback, because a lot of people in the Caribbean community still remember him. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing that, you know, I think that a couple of you pointed out is that for those of us who are somewhat expats and living in curling countries where we can curl, I don't know about you, but I don't see anybody of color at my curling club or any of the curling clubs I've been to in the US, Minnesota, North Dakota, Canada. There are no people of color, no kids of color, no kids in the junior program of color. And so one of the things that I've suggested to the clubs is that you got to do outreach and you got to make it affordable, because curling is seen as a very expensive and exclusive sport to communities of color, and one where they're not very welcome in. And again, it goes right back to that TV screen. They don't see you, then they say that's not a sport we do. And then when you do have a few kids who are interested and they see a price tag for the shoes, 135, and they see the, whatever, and then the curling clubs. And my general feeling of curling clubs in the United States, they're somewhat exclusive. They smile, but they're not doing outreach, and they're not really like, come, let me take you out the street and teach you how the game is played. So that's something, Monica, that and folks in curling nations can work on really diversifying and making it affordable.
So I just want to speak to that while I remember. So when I played high school, curling was 20 years ago. And obviously I was the only person of color. There was one other Asian guy on our team. So we were a 5-person team and we rotated. But at the time, it's true, it was predominantly white. But now, so I'm still in touch with some of my curling coaches from back then, and they're still in with school programs now. So we see a lot more diversity. So where I live in Brampton, it's heavily South Asian and Caribbean. So we see a lot of diversity here now, even in our high school curling programs, whether it be that they take it up as an extracurricular just because they need to fulfill an extracurricular requirement. But it's a lot more development slowly because they're taking it up through their high school programs, also through Chad's Rocks and Rings. We've had a lot of gym classes with floor curl and whatnot, where they're getting exposure. So slowly but surely, I think we're seeing a few more. It's not going to be a steady stream at once, but you're getting a few here and there. And as mindsets change over time, I think you'll continue to see more. But again, it would help to have someone on the greater stage to, represent us. But it's happening, but we just don't see it right away.
Yeah, Ray, I wanted to add a little bit more thought to that.
At some point, I'd like to also share my experience.
Yeah, I'll be quick, Adriana. So, Ray talked about great, 20 years ago, maybe the diversity wasn't there in curling clubs in the Toronto or Greater Toronto area either. I certainly noticed that when I started curling in Toronto. While the curling clubs were welcoming, when you stepped into into the club, people welcomed you in and took you in, but there was very little in the way of a proactive or an intentional outreach to different communities. And I think that was what's missing. That still is missing in a lot of curling clubs, right? You have to be proactive and intentional in the outreach to communities, not just to say that, yes, we welcome everybody. That's, but it's actually to invite them in and find ways to actually invite them in and include them into our sport. And what I'm saying with the school programs is, with the school programs, there is an intentional outreach, right, with the schools, or there's some sort of coordinated effort. So that's helped translate into some more diversity among the, I think, younger curlers within curling clubs. But I think the diversity tends to be quite limited in the age brackets. As you go, into the older age brackets within curling facilities or curling clubs in Canada, you still see a very homogeneous type of demographic.
Adriana, you're up.
Great. And I also just want to say that I really appreciate what Ray and Jason and Raju have shared, Kim also. And I think there's different ways of seeing the barriers, and it is at a club level. I very much agree that there are, let me say this differently. For myself, there wasn't a particular barrier. Maybe it's because I was just able to pay a $12 fee to go to a Learn to Curl, and soon enough I was able to join an instructional league, and from there I had a very good experience of being on a team born out of that instructional league with which included Erica, African American, Roland, Asian American, Sarah, who's white, and we just took off as our little cohort. Afterwards, I think there are other barriers that I think are very typical in clubs around being able to engage in competitive curling. And I think all of us have on this panel probably have experienced this to some degree. In terms of barrier, but I want to also mention, and it relates to the experience that Ray and Jason were discussing. What I have learned as an expat Mexican coming into the US and living here is that we nationals have to understand what it is to be a person of color in the US, in Canada, in places where I may not see myself in those categories in my country. And for somebody who is raised in those environments, that is a barrier to where you have learned that there are spaces where you're not particularly welcome. So that has been a learning for me and something that I am very much interested in supporting in terms of supporting clubs to do outreach to Spanish-speaking communities where I can be most helpful, but any other communities as well. In terms of access, barriers to becoming a more competitive player, I think we go there back to like where we're starting to play at a world stage. I think that's a whole level of other barriers, and I think Kim was starting to talk about that in terms of how do you skill build, what coaching is available to you, what in the pandemic we've learned that there are tons of online resources, but ultimately it's about practice, access to ice, and eventually you just have to battle. Monica, with your incredible experience, you probably have had such opportunity to improve because you've been able to compete, and so those are part of the problems that we have as players on a world stage. And I would also say that distance between players, like not necessarily our teammates are in the same city, because my teammates are in Canada, they're in Seattle, they're in Arizona, and other parts of the country. And so that's another barrier to access. And then we transfer that to trying to grow the sport in our countries. That also creates an additional level of barriers. Like right now, the Mexican Curling Federation is really trying hard to figure out how do you develop a community, and they will then again have these same issues. Who gets access to that community, right? And so I would see that those are the different areas of barriers that exist, and how do you create those conditions? And we're all different. We're positioned differently in different places, whether we're in country or in here in the US or Canada. So that's something that I keep in mind. But I also want to say, for those clubs here in the US that I can support in somehow doing outreach to primarily Spanish-speaking communities or youth of color in nearby, like the Bay Area Curling Club. We out of Oakland, we were curling right across from a public housing. So they were able to support some of the youth who were hockey players who got drawn into curling to be in some of the junior competitive teams. So it doesn't start, but as I think TJ was saying, being able to see different faces out on the ice is already a point of welcoming. And one last thing for TJ, because TJ never said this, but his wife Susana is Mexicana. And so TJ, I'm gonna steal her one of these days.
Well, according to every Nigerian article, she's Canadian, man. And then one article said she was from Switzerland. So Susie's like international.
She certainly is.
Thank you, Adriana, for sharing that. Sorry that we took a little while to get to you. I'd like to talk about representation, both at the club level and at on the world stage. Someone mentioned it was a bit of a chicken versus the egg type deal, and we certainly want to have webinars on this topic in the future. But is there anything you can share about your thoughts on that and how we can improve that and why it's so important?
Adriana, do you want to go first, or?
I'll go first. Never give a lawyer a chance to speak. That's never a good idea. No. No, guys, it is. I can tell you this. We've been fortunate that we have a solid ground operation. We have a headquarters. We have leagues of floor curling going on. We've participated in all the major championships that we can. The fact is, we need to be on those TV. We need to be seen. And I mean, everybody here knows the Jamaican story. Once that came out, they've been in the Olympics every single year for ad nauseum. They haven't stopped. It's just exposure, exposure, exposure. If we can get because everything else comes after that. I was talking with Lisa Weigel. She did a clinic for us, and Lisa Weigel and Emma Miskew both said that even in Canada, as popular as it is, that it was very hard for them to get sponsorship dollars until they were seen on TV over and over again. She said eventually winning made it super easy, but she said to get the local stuff, to get dollars so that they could take time off of work, so that they could actually get a job with the government that would allow them to curl, that came with exposure. When they were seen as exposure and not just club curlers, that's when they got the money. And that's when they got sponsorships. And that's what propelled them to have enough time to train to be elites. And so if that's the case, then Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, Guyana, for Ray to be able to put it on the ground, he's got to have like the Trinidad story.
So the biggest thing that I've always encountered in my time on the curling club boards over the years is how are we going to get more of you into our clubs? And the only answer that I could give 10 years ago was the same thing that I'm going to say today, is that in order for more people to get into the club, they need to see more of us on TV. And but I've curled competitively in Ontario for a number of years, and the only way that you earn sponsorship, that you earn TV coverage, is by sacrifices and working hard. And so in order for me long-term to see people of my own color on TV, it's going to take my own sacrifice and my own hard work to develop as a better curler, to put myself in positions to win games so that we can achieve higher and higher goals to get back to a world championships. We're now down in the B pool for mixed doubles. We're not a horrible team, but we're not exactly at the top either. We're kind of that middle of the pack. And so it's just making those sacrifices to work that much harder to get to the top, to get back into the world championships. Hopefully we get TV coverage if we do make it back. And I think that kind of feeds down into social curling as well too, both in Canada, in the United States, to get more diverse curling population, and in our country back home, because as I said, when they see you on TV, they're more likely to say, that's me on TV, I want to take it up, kind of thing. So it's kind of, for me, I feel the burden of responsibility to put in the hard work now, because I think it'll pay off 20, 30 years down the line. When I stop curling, there will be more of my own people taking it up later on.
So if I can jump in, Monica. Sorry, go ahead, Joanna.
On this question of exposure and resources, and I also just wanted to mention that it is true that the majority of us were just self-financed. So at some point, and the chicken and egg problem, and I don't think anybody is actually looking for a golden egg here, no, but just the opportunity to be able to finance some skill building and attendance. And I was talking to Coach Bill Tischart the other day, and he gave me a really good suggestion. He said that instead of talking about sponsorships, we should start talking about patrons. No, like that it's almost like patrons of the arts, where when we think about sponsorships, we always think about those opportunities where somehow we're going to provide some profits back. But when we're growing the sport, it really has to be come from some space of understanding the journey that we're on. Now we have a lot of barriers, that our federations have a lot of barriers, depending on where you're at. Like Mexico is still working with the local federations and local sports organizations in Mexico. Their winter sports in Mexico are not financed by the Mexican government. So they have a struggle on that end. But meanwhile, as players, we also have a struggle in trying to find our own way to support our growth. So, and when they come together is at some point, we will support the players in Mexico with the knowledge gained. So those, our ability to grow those resources and have and this is a suggestion for how federations, other federations can help, is that I think there are capacities to build like toolkits that other federations can use as we solve our chicken and egg problem. But also, if there are some patrons of curling out there who would like to support Guyana or India or Hong Kong or Nigeria or Mexico, call us up. We're ready, no?
Raju, you're next.
Yeah, so I was gonna add on to like what I think Adriana and TJ and everyone else has said. I think the way we are thinking about it at the Curling Federation of India is like, I think there has to be both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach. I think like that exposure, that visibility will help in that top-down growth of the sport. But if you look at like India, I think during the Winter Olympics, curling is already the most watched sport on YouTube or on like TV, right? So I think what we are trying to do through the federation is figure out how do we get more people onto whatever limited ice we have. And it's like small skating rinks in India. How do we get people like into those skating rinks? And thankfully, like now that India is a member and we've been able to get equipment through WCF, and also I think Chad's on the call, I think the street curling and floor curling equipment has been really helpful in terms of like just educating people about the sport and getting them excited about eventually trying it on ice. So I think it needs to be both top down and bottoms up. And also I think like trying to grow it in curling developed countries among the diaspora can only get us so far. We also have to start thinking about how do we grow the sport back home, get more people involved. And I think both of them have to go hand in hand.
I don't mean to sound cliche, but what I think the issue is, like, for example, at the World Curling Mixed Doubles Championships, there are 64 curling nations, 45, I think, or 48 of them showed up. And then the World Curling Federation said, that's the last time we ever do that. From now on, we're just going to have the elites and we're going to have everybody else. Well, why? Because if we're going to be exposed, if we're going to be expected to compete with the best, we need to be there with the best. We need to be seen with the best. We need to be a part of that program. Once you separate these are the haves, those are the have-nots. The have-nots get relegated. And I want everybody to think for a second. That's exactly what we do in real society. We have the affluent and we have the non-affluent. And you don't get to be with the affluence until you earn to be with the affluence, or you make enough money to be there. And that's the same thing we're seeing here. And if our group is about diversity, inclusion, we got to break down some of that standard, those old social mores, and say everybody's a part of this. Everybody, it's a team approach. As soon as you relegate all the secondary countries because we don't have ice, we're new, and all of that to the back of the field, then the only teams people see is the same old teams. And you know what? Let's be honest. You know, Australia was fantastic. They came from nowhere. We were all cheering for them when they made to number 4. But that took a lot. That doesn't happen for everybody. You know, and so if we're going to be inclusive, we got to be inclusive. If the sport has it's like any other league. If there are 64 teams, you play a 64-team league and you do it. And some years, some teams rise, some years, some teams don't rise. But I also wanted to, I'll end with movie cliches. Rocky. You know, think of all the movies we love in sports. It's because the little guy got a shot. Why do we even watch the Olympics? We all watch the Olympics. Tell me the truth if you guys disagree with me. We watch the Olympics not to see the USA sprinter win the 100 because we know they're going to win. We like seeing that guy from Trinidad Tobago pull out the 200-meter dash and go, wow, the little guy finally. We all love the little guy's story. We all love seeing the Rocky story, the person nobody thought could do it. You know, in Olympics history, Abibi Bikila winning the marathon, Mama Waldy winning the marathon. Look at Ethiopia and Kenya, guys, in terms of the marathon. They saw those guys in the Olympics, and now Kenya and Ethiopia are some of the strongest long distance teams in any Summer Olympics. It took exposure. And if this group really is serious, we're going to stop leveling the haves and the have-nots and fight to have everybody at the table.
And also just adding to that, I think like even at the Pacific Asia Curling Championships, I think it's only like 6 teams who are like whose games are broadcast live, right? So if I wanted to watch Nigeria versus Kazakhstan, like why is that not on a WCF YouTube channel?
Or in that same situation, when you go to the qualifying events, those are not televised, right? Or they're not filmed, like the World Curling Federation events. So though we have participated, for example, Mexico in men's and women's world qualifying events, or in the America's Challenge, those games are not available. And so it is very important for the development of curling, for the growth of curling, especially in country, to have that exposure. This is something that, you know, I thought about also, and I've also wondered in terms of resources, like what other events could exist specifically where our nations are visible. How about, I know mixed doubles is easier to promote among our countries, but can we have a mixed double tournament, perhaps even a cash spiel, you guys, for our resources that invites the emerging curling nations? No, TJ? TJ is giving the thumbs up.
Exposure.
I do run a mixed doubles cash spiel up here in Toronto, so everyone is always welcome at the end of September, and everyone is open. We're actually hoping after the pandemic is over, it'll expand out. We initially had 20 teams. We're hoping to expand out to 32 teams for that same purpose, to bring in hopefully new and emerging countries and whatnot, to kind of give them an opportunity to play against some of the best, but also get some competition, you know, in a competitive environment. So the invite's out there, end of September, hopefully.
And Team Hong Kong can attest that that's an excellent event.
Yes, we had Team Hong Kong there. So so it's a good event. So the invite's out, so just got to take it up.
But
yeah,
I will have to echo what
we need to get Curl Canada and the WCF to make a big deal out of that.
Well, we could use our own social media, and we have options to, you know, promote it more than obviously when we've only run it for 1 year, but like you in Denver, I think also have a mixed doubles cash spiel as well too. So there's tools that we can use to promote it for sure. And the more newer countries, you know, that's something we could promote to the WCF as well too. So there's options. It's just a matter of getting you all in one spot, and we're good to go.
Certainly with technology, you know, it's a lot easier just for an amateur to be, you know, streaming games or curling games. We've seen a lot of that from individual curling teams during this COVID pandemic, right? And maybe there's a way where these bond steals or cash steals that are featuring a lot of the international teams can get streamed, and a way for either this organization or the WCF to actually promote the fact that these games are being streamed, and you actually have the Mexican team and the Nigerian team and the Hong Kong team playing at this local cash spiel.
So yeah, so when we played at the Pacific International Cup 2 years ago, we had like someone from the newspaper in Richmond who came out and featured the Indian team like in a local newspaper, right? So yeah, so that's possible.
I think that's a good segue into what the last topic I'd like to discuss, which is, what can we do differently? And, at the club level, WCF level, your organizational level, just let's throw together some ideas, even if they're outside the box, of what we can do differently to, make things better.
I'm just thinking out of the box here in Toronto and across the country. I believe there's a lot of LGBT curling leagues for the LGBT community. And thinking along those lines, maybe starting something, maybe a Caribbean curling community league, or Latin American league. I know at the WCF we have our kind of little group that we call LACA, which is the Latin American and Caribbean Curling Association, which is basically kind of an answer to the Red Jackets of Canada, but, it's basically our own little niche kind of group of Brazil, Mexico, Guyana, and whatnot. But basically in our centers that we're living in Toronto or Denver and whatnot, so creating a league that's inclusive for our own communities to kind of semi break down the barriers of entering a club that you're not familiar with. So at least going in that you're amongst your own people and whatnot. So it kind of is a little bit more inviting to come in, and hopefully it's something you can integrate in later. But yeah, that's kind of one of my ideas that I'd like to hopefully start in the near future.
One of the things that I've suggested before, and I've actually reached out already to the Mexican consulate, but clubs could reach out to them if you're looking to attract people who are first generation immigrants, for example. I think reaching out to the local consulates, whether it's Guatemala, Brazil, Nigeria, etc., could be a good avenue to get the word out for Learn to Curl, especially if you're going to cater to a specific language. So that's one option. Also, I've started on my website, I put up a expanded curling glossaries in Spanish, English, and I'm looking for people to throw down some terminology to include it, to make that language accessible, because even in the definitions, I think a lot of curlers might say, oh, that's what it means, whether you're an English speaker. So there's ways to make the curling language accessible. It's a very quirky sport, as we all know. And ultimately, I think just I'm an organizer, I'm an activist, I work in community all the time. So doing person-to-person outreach is important. That's what I do, and that's how I find that people interact best. Obviously, COVID times, that's a little bit complicated, but that type of personal outreach is something that I'm most interested in doing.
Anyone else? I know TJ wants to have a redesigned Continental Cup with all the continents, which I think is a fantastic idea. Any other creative ideas? There's a lot of work to be done, I know.
Yeah, and along the lines of that idea, because I've been studying the Canadian Continental Cup, they kind of just include one other, like the three teams and the three teams. Maybe they go, if they divided it into 4 teams, that would solve their issue right there. They just make it a 4-team tournament. It's a Vegas tournament, or it's a Ontario, London, or whatever. It's fun, and it can be that simple. 4 divisions, lots of fun, lots of smiles, teams getting together, doing stuff, but it's the exposure. And then the other thing is, I really, and Monica, because you work with the WCF, as soon as you start saying this is the A team and that's the B team, and we all know the developers are going to be over there for a long, we could be talking 50, 60 years at the rate that we're getting developmental help. There's got to be, and that can be that way for a competitive level. We all get that, but there's got to be at least 1 or 2 showcase events where everybody's there and that everybody's getting that exposure. And then when they fine tune it to the Olympic 10, we get it. But up until then, it should be, because think about skiing. When you guys watch skiing on TV, they got 32 people, 32 athletes or 34 skiing down the hill, and then they do 2 rounds, 3 rounds. They should be able to do something similar with curling teams.
Actually, while I remember again, I know when the WCF tried the World Cup for 1 year, I know kind of the feedback at Congress, I forget, I think it was the Hungarian fellow had said that the World Cup that they tried was not really inclusive enough. It was a more limited field than the World Championships and more limited field than the Olympic Games, because I think there was only 8 teams per discipline. But like Tijani was saying, is the World Cup for skiing and stuff like that has a greater field. So I think maybe the WCF needs to look into starting a World Cup that's kind of televised, but includes a greater number of countries to get more exposure. So it's not the World Championships and it's not leading to the Olympics, but it's a World Cup to feature other faces that you don't necessarily see. And actually the funny part is my mom's not a curler, but the other day we were watching a stream of the Newfoundland provincials on YouTube, and she said, well, isn't this nice to finally see 2 new teams that I've never seen before, because you see the same teams on TV all the time. So I think it's good also from a fan perspective. I think fans do crave to see new faces on TV, but it's a matter of the buy-in also from, organizations like the WCF and TV organizations that have to carry it as well too. So a World Cup that's a little bit more inclusive would be great.
Yeah, and I see that Jonathan is mentioning in the chat that he'd like to see a Davis Cup style tournament from tennis, but for curling, country versus country. And I think that's an idea that has even been floated in discussions within Mexican players with the Mexican Curling Federation, to have some alternative tournament where that happens, where you can kind of like play down. And as we were talking about barriers to access, I love a saying that I heard from a curler, that you can't coach experience. And for those of us who are playing, and for the federation seeking exposure, there's nothing like having that high-end competitive experience to really wrap your brain around about what the gap is, what your gap is, country gap, player gap. So I think that's a really good idea.
I just have to say, Jonathan, that is a great idea. I love the Davis Cup idea, and I'm expecting Jonathan to champion that and make it happen.
I think we're all tennis fans. Me, I guess Jonathan and Jason, we're all tennis fans, so we can definitely take that one on.
Awesome. Well, I think there's probably quite a bit more we could talk about. We'll have to schedule a follow-up panel discussion. And I know we've actually had a few other countries join and email us, so we could actually have a whole additional group of discussion as well. So look forward to more panels to come. And I think we'll wrap it up here today now, unless there's anything else anyone would like to say before we go. I don't want to not let anyone say like one last thing that they've been dying to say. No. Okay, perfect. Thanks to all the panelists, and thanks everyone who joined today. Look for more from us to come, and hopefully we'll see you at some of our future webinars. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Sarah.
Good to connect across
Yeah.
all our spots.
Thanks so much, Monica.
Thank you.
And Sarah.
Thanks, everyone.